right, we're underway. Xavier, thanks for joining us on the MedTech Leaders podcast, where we speak to founders and leaders like yourself who can go into a little bit more about their journeys and share some interesting insights for the audience. So, firstly, it might be useful just to get into a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Junaid. I mean, it's great to be here. So I've I'm usually introducing myself as a recovering academic, as I just actually left my academic position 3 years ago now to be full-time CEO of Gold Standard Phantoms. But I've had a long on and off career always in the field of MRI since the mid 90s, actually. So I've done my PhD in the field, then moved and worked under a project such as sponsored by a major OEM working at Johns Hopkins. Then I moved to join that OEM directly, and then moved back, if you want, into the UK to take up a professorship position. So I've had actually a career that spanned both academia and non-academic aspects. So working for large OEMs, working for, in the meantime, for research labs, as well as pure academic institutions like Johns Hopkins in the US, or I was a professor for 15 years at University College London at the Institute of Neurology.
Really interesting. So, like, if we delve into that a little bit, so what was your motivation behind wanting to be in academics, firstly?
Oh, well, actually, I finished my PhD late 90s. Full-blown internet bubble exploded. Difficult to find jobs outside of academia, and that was one of the first things. Like, look, academia and doing research at the time felt like a really cool things to do. It was also very interesting, and I always said to myself, I'm going to try that gig for as long as I'm actually having fun. And I found a postdoc position, as I said, at Hopkins, which was funded uh, by this OEM, and I started and I thrived there and got onto the academic ladder. And at some point, I was not that happy anymore to live in the US, so I moved. And when I moved to work for, in this case, Philips, uh, it was actually to move to Singapore, so in Asia. And I was then working, uh, got back into academia, into research in Singapore, and then got hired back as a professor here. And, after a while, I I've seen it all. I was head of department. It just went all the way to vice dean of faculty at UCL, and you know, it was not. I was really bugged by one big and important aspect, which is no matter how hard we were working in academia, it was very, very hard to get anything out of academia into the real world, and especially in the medtech and in our business. And so that's why basically from already late 2014 onwards, um, I got this spin out called Standard Phantoms, where we together with two young chaps at the time who just finished their PhD at UCL, not with me, but who were really, really smart. We founded that company to try to help improve the field of MRI in general.
Really interesting. So your motivation for, I guess, unless I've misunderstood, is that you wanted to kind of see more impact of the work you were doing in the real world.
Exactly, because for the whole of my career, what I've been trying to do has been to create new methods that improved type of images we will get from MRI. And this new method would have the specificity to be able to measure parameters using MRI. I mean, MRI is a fantastic technology that is extremely versatile, and you don't get a single type of image like you would get with a CT, which is basically get an image of your body. You can actually tweak that methodology to create all different types of measurements, and
Mm,
these measurements could really improve diagnosis, but they've rarely moved into the clinical practice, because basically the MRI scanners themselves were not actually set up to be measuring devices. They were set up to be cameras, like a CT camera, like any other radiological equipment. What they're providing is our images. But uh, myself, as you know, over. I mean, I guess if you're looking at the membership of the International Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine, you'll get over 7,000 people around the world. Scientists working in this field are trying to improve that technology and develop quantitative imaging methods. And these take forever, like 10 to 15 years to reach the clinical market. And even then, uh, uh, on average, very, very, very limited number of methods have ever, you know, transferred from the academic and research world into the daily clinical practice. So our aim was to basically develop and to set up a company that could provide first quality assurance. And recently we've moved into uh, a, into the field of calibration of the measurement that you're making with an MRI scanner, so that basically you are taking that hurdle away to move these advanced methodologies from the research into clinical practice.
really interesting. You'd be very qualified to answer this question, Xavier. I guess having worked in academia as well as in I guess corporate environments, how was that transition to then going from that into, I guess, starting your own company? How was that transition? What things moved quite well? What was quite different? Was it an easy transition or was it difficult? How was it?
So no matter how you're trying to do, there's a steep learning curve, right? In general, when I mean, academia is not unlike large corporate, right? Like a, a a large university like University College London at the time when it was in the senior leadership was running on a yearly annual turnover of over £2 billion, right? So it's significant. It's a significant corporate business,
Yeah.
uh, and no matter how, no matter what, at the end of the day, when you're in the senior leadership, you need to act as a manager. The different things in academia, um, unlike in most large companies, the people who get into the senior leadership don't necessarily have, uh, you know, uh, management skills or corporate management skills to get there. So that's why what you've seen in British academia, lots of uh, uh, lots of them have hired professional managers to be at the head, and it makes perfect sense because otherwise, you let academics work by themselves, and it's a disaster. Nobody has everybody is trying to just work only for their own research group and etc. So you just need to have this. But once you move into your own private small company, all of a sudden there's this entire humming running machine that you have uh, under a large corporate that doesn't exist anymore. So you need to do everything yourself, from accounting to anything related to the legal aspects of the job to actually effectively, as I think as you hinted, getting a team together, getting a business together. So you need to get money on one side. But that's basically we started a company off a large grant, which is something that I brought back from academia, right? In academia, uh, a lot of people just don't understand. A researcher, a professor, usually has his own salary paid in this country. If you work in a medical school in the US, you don't even have your own salary paid, and you need to get your entire group is paid on what is called soft money or grants. So you need to apply for a grant, and in this country, at least, you don't need to reimburse your own salary.
Mm.
Uh, but in the US, you will need to reimburse up to 80% of your own salary plus the whole team on grants. So that's basically the way it works. So as an academic, you know how to try to get money because an academic research group is literally similar to a small company. You need to, every person on your group is paid on money you get in. Now, as an academic, you have only a very limited number of customers, and these customers, quote unquote, are um, the research councils in the UK. It would be EPSRC, MRC. It would be the Wellcome Trust. It would be large charitable organization. And what you're selling as an academic is a research project. Is the capacity for you to develop new ideas and develop a research project, and you need to be better than everybody else. Usually, it's a very hard thing to do to get a grant. You have a cutoff at you need to be within the 10 or 20th percentile of the best project to get the money, right? So you need to be better than the competition to get the money. And with that money, you can employ your people. And so basically, it's a little bit like a business,
Mm.
except that you have this whole layer of people who are dealing a lot with all of the all of the legal aspect, uh, all of this. So when I started the business, we did it in very much the same way. We got a large grant that was for business. We set up the company and we started being able to pay, in this case, my two co-founders, Aaron Oliver Taylor and Tom Hampshire, to work on our first Phantom, our first quality assurance device. Uh, and then at the same time, we needed to set up everything to set up the company from a legal point of view, to get all our acts in a row. And originally, so we managed to get 1.1 million pounds to get the company off the ground and set it up. After that, so I moved into another big learning curve, which was how do you fundraise? How do you get investors on board? If you're in a deep tech, med tech type of business, this is not only important; it's likely mandatory. Otherwise, you won't be able to only survive using grants. So we kept writing grants to kept getting new project, new devices developed. At the same time, around 2017, we managed to raise our first pre-seed round. Now that was another completely different skill set to have, where in addition to um, day-to-day accountings and stuff, you need to start having a little bit of an idea of what a corporate finance looks like. How do you project a business? How do you what is the value proposition? All an entire new set of aspects that basically I didn't have. And at the time in 2017, maybe I didn't look hard enough, but there were in this country, 2016, which is when we started to fundraise, there were very, very few accelerators and all of these type of structure that helps young and budding entrepreneurs, um, well, young, not always, but as early stage entrepreneurs into their career. Right now, there are loads of them, and I wish I had all these when we started, because we started and we learned the hard way, which was by making loads of mistakes and, you know, trying to correct and moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess that picking a couple of points there,
Yeah.
you managed to raise a grant of 1.1 million early on. How did you go about doing that? I just ask in the sense of, I guess lots of people probably think that they have a good idea and they'd love to be able to access these grants. How do you give yourself the best possible chance to do that?
Well, in this case, we managed to make use of one of the most amazing uh, type of funding that you have in this country, which is called SBRI, Small Business Research Initiatives,
Hmm.
and it come across several different fields, but in MedTech, these are particularly good. So these are top-down governmental uh, grants, which basically you need to make. So the government wants to move something to move the research into to move the needle into a certain area. For example, you know, early dementia diagnosis or something of that kind. And they would want to have, if the government decides, for example, for early dementia, to have interventions and apps that needs to be able to be distributed and working directly in the communities rather than everything going in the hospital, they will put a call out for these research grants. I mean, these through SBRI, you don't work exactly on a grant, you work on a research project. If you want, you are hired, quote unquote, by the government to perform a research project, which, because it's in those terms, you don't have the major issue that if you have a pure grant, so you're not hired trying to solve a problem for the government, but you're just submitting yourself an idea, like um, for most of the grant that you get through UKRI, whether on the academic side, EPSLC, MRC, or on the business side, you all these grants are normally not funded at 100%, right? Because there are some rules related to the government not being able to, um, you know, give you money for free. So you need to always have a copay, an amount of money that you need to raise separately that should cover about, typically in a small business for Innovate UK grants, you're talking about 30%. So if you have a 1 million project, fantastic, you can get 700 k from the government, but you need to find the 300,000 yourself remaining, which in a in an early stage business can come almost only from investors until you have a product in the market, and then once you have a product in the market, you can actually start selling things and raise money in that way, which is by far the best way to raise any money once you have something to sell.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I guess like you did also mention as well that when you had to approach investors, had to involve you having to like think a little bit differently. So what did you learn from that, and what advice have you got for people that if they're going through that kind of stage, how to
I
give themselves?
mean, one of the most important aspect is you really you rarely speak to investors that are very knowledgeable in your own fields, right?
Mhm.
So you need to be very careful um, about what you're pitching. Most deep tech, med tech founders are in love with their products. That's a standard, right? Most people love their solutions. I think one of the most important aspect is to just show how whatever you're trying to sell is first answering a real need, a real clinical need in this case, if we're talking medtech, uh, and um, and whether people are willing to pay for it. At the end of the day, you're not. It's not about how good your solution is going to be, how great you're going to, how many lives you're going to save. Is the biggest issue in and that's an issue that is actually completely blocking a lot of uh, all the advances right now from AI, for example, in radiology, is how do you integrate how smooth can your solution, whichever it is, whether it's software, hardware, whatever it is, how smooth it can integrate within the day-to-day of the working of a hospital, because your investors will not be interested only in, hey, is this a good product or not, and is this possible? But right now they start to be very, very good at understanding how much is it going to really lead to friction, because any friction in such a complicated, difficult multiplayer system as healthcare, any additional friction mechanism will likely prohibit your new solution to get into the market, even if it solves a clinical solution. And it's uh, and to be honest, a lot of the investors are still quite afraid, and potentially rightly so, to invest in companies, because it's often very, very difficult um, to to know upfront where the hurdles are going to be, and therefore there's always a significant amount of risk that an investor will need to take. In this case, it's what it's called venture capitalism, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that you need to pitch to them is not only your solution, but you need to have actually understood the complexity of the field in which you're trying to sell into, and that's that's a really, really hard bit. And when I started, I I didn't have any of that, and and very quickly you end up with discussions that turn a bit short very quickly. Uh,
So just so I understand what you mean, do you mean like you understand the chain of all the events that will take place
yeah,
by?
you need to understand the chain of the events, but you also need to understand uh, the intricacies of getting anything into, well, the NHS is one case, but uh, getting your product into the NHS or getting your product into the private healthcare in the US will be very, very different. And this both from a market positioning perspective. So basically, who do you sell to? Who is your customer, right? First of all, and what is their customer?
Mm,
And while this seems to be an easy answer, an easy thing to answer, in for most products out there in the market, it's probably an easy answer. In healthcare, it's anything but easy. And if you identify that wrong, you'll get, yeah, you get real hard time to get your product through.
yeah. So like in like tangible terms, Xavier, what could that what would you need to maybe show? Would you need to maybe have actual like kind of financials in terms of, oh, this would be the price, these would be the volume.
So that's the easy part, the financial price, volume, margin, net margin,
Yeah.
and then uh, uh, the the more complicated one, which is almost impossible, or when you start to really assess, is what's going to be your customer acquisition price. How much you need to invest to get one more customer
Mm,
to buy your product.
mm,
And again, for a large direct to consumer product, you can there are models out there, you can use them. It's great. You can use paid advertising social media of one kind or another, or more traditional on posters, or more traditional radio, TV ad, whatever it is. This you have a price to pay to get the product in front of the customer. Uh, you know that a campaign will return so much in return. How many customers
Mm.
you get, the price you need to pay to get one additional customer. You you market your product with a certain margin, and you're positive. That's basically the thing. In the healthcare, well, reaching the right customer is in the first place complex. Who do you need to reach in the hospital? And okay, you might reach, for us, we're providing quality assurance or calibration for MRI. So radiologists could be a good idea. Radiologists, yeah, they might want that, in particular certain leaders in the field. But then the radiographers who are going to use use the device, needs to be able to use it in an easy way. It needs to be integrated into the workflow, because if they don't use it, no matter how hard you're pushing, this is another point, a point of contention. Now you need to be able to sell to the radiologist, but the radiologists say, well, how much money can I make in addition? So uh, um, again, you need to understand how much, where is the money flowing from and to in the business,
Mm.
in their business, and who is paying and on what condition. And for example, in the US, you will have CPT codes. You'll have actually a reimbursement code that any act being done in the US can go to, and these are, very large. This is like for the whole of the US, uh, and you have these codes are set up at the government level. They are used for Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement, but they also use every insurance company will use those and will actually put a price on those to reimburse a hospital for this particular act. So this is the US system. In to take the complete opposite, the NHS will pay. When I was a professor at UCL, I was also had a joint appointment with the NHS. So the NHS works in a very different way. You have actually a certain amount of money that is associated with a patient journey, right? So the patient journey starts when they enter into the hospital and ends when basically are going home. But there's everything from entering, being first diagnosed, going to radiology, then if they have a cancer, going through the whole treatment, uh, all the way through their life, and then eventually being cancer free. So that will be the whole patient pathway. And uh, uh, trust, I'm simplifying here, but trust in principle are actually reimbursed for the whole patient pathway. So actually, how do you sell something to the radiology department in the NHS if for them it doesn't make much of a difference about how, it's a very different and complicated way of actually reimbursing directly. So their investment might not be directly something that they will be able to get some money back in return. So you need to from a because while every trust needs to, you know close their books and then making sure that they work, at the end of the day, the way it works is like every department within the trust needs also to be making as little deficit as possible these days, rather than profit, but if possible, making even profit. So it is really hard if you need to sell into one, but there's somebody else who's going to benefit from, right?
No.
So as you could see, these final details are really basically the nuts and bolts of having a medtech business, and most people just don't think at all about it, especially in the early stages.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it, Xavier? Because like for your product, like early on, obviously you need the funding to really kind of get going. But if you go to an investor, you also want to be able to show something, right? Actually prove out the
Yeah,
concept a little bit. So, am I correct though? You need to be careful when you go to an investor, right? So, even if you are early stages, at least maybe go to them where you've actually done some kind of proof of concept. Would you say, like, yeah,
it's getting worse and worse on that end. Yes, so a lot of early stage investor in this country will 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 want not a simple proof of principle these days, but they would want some kind of traction in one way or another. So
yeah,
some of the early ways of showing traction is to get, for example, letter of intent. If you can get somebody to sign a letter of intent, like, yeah, once you have your product, I'd love to buy some, is a good. This is a good starting point to just show, you know. And in medtech is really hard because until you have all the regulatory bits in place, generally you're not able to sell anything.
yeah, yeah. Just on that point, I guess we were having an interesting chat a bit offline about like the regulatory side of things. I think you're in the process of doing your FDA. Do you mind just going into a little bit about kind of
Yeah.
that journey and
So
yeah,
yeah, Gold Standard Phantoms has had an interesting journey. We positioned most of our products early on as quality assurance devices, which are medtech devices if you want, but they are in a gray area and they are not regulated in the EU and UK by MDR or by MHRA, and neither are they regulated by the FDA. So we could start selling some of our products right away without any regulatory compliance because they're not. I mean, some of our most expensive and complicated product that includes also some electronics, there you need to have compliance that are in terms of electronics compliance in all of these aspects, which would probably you will need to push to have to go all the way to the IEC 60601-1, which is like the safety aspect of any electronic equipment that enters in contact with patients. But in general, we didn't have anything. Now, our new product is a calibration tool that will change the images directly acquired on patients, and therefore, here we have a medical device. Now, having a medical device, all of a sudden, you need to actually take care of MDR, so medical device regulation in the EU. Uh, you have a similar aspect of the MDD in a still MDD based in the UK for that will enable you to get CE marking or UKCA marking to sell in this country and Europe respectively. And for those, you just basically in general you're dealing with a notified body. So you need dealing with a private company whose job it is to actually take you through the process, and they have themselves got the certification so that they are allowed to give you a stamp that your product is actually in line with the regulation. The American system is a centralized system where you don't deal with notified bodies, you deal with the FDA directly. And you have two major routes to get into regulatory. I mean, a lot of your audience will probably know that, but just one is you can find a product that is doing more or less the same thing already, and then you're using the so-called 510K route. Like you can actually show that your product is basically similar to a previous product, and then the submission to get an approval from the FDA is actually smoother, easier, simpler. Or you can have a de novo application. Like this has never been done before. this is a new product, and then the paperwork and the work that you need to put into it is actually more expensive in large part, because in the second part, in general, you also need to show a lot of clinical validations. So that means clinical trials, and clinical trials, as we discussed before, you can get grants for that, but they are actually generally not cheap. So you have these two things in the FDA. For our purposes, for a new product, we are going to start with the FDA. The US market has a larger pull right now than the European one, so we decided to go first there. And we had some really, and we are in the process of that, so I'm not going to disclose too much, and I'm finding my way around. But generally, some of the early discussion we had were extremely interesting in the way that, while for the European side, you only need to deal with the law. Basically, you have regulations, and you need to show that you follow this regulation and you get your CE marking, etc. For the FDA, um, you, as I said, you can use these 510K routes. Now, the interesting bit is, if you're going for the FDA and you're going via the 510K route, you need to find what is called a predicate, is which products is already on the market that basically does what you're doing. And here you need to be very careful, because um, if you find a product that is already on the market that you've significantly improved, right? And right now it's sold in the US for relatively cheap. And it's sold in the US, as I said before, it's sold in the US based on these reimbursement codes, these CPT codes, right? Because that's how the whole system works. A hospital or a clinic, to get the money from insurance or the government, will need to show that they've done these acts as according to these CPT codes. And these acts, so anything that you're doing, if you're talking about, in our case, radiology department, you need to invest into a new product. You need to be able to reimburse. It's a business. They need to be able to get reimbursed. Now, if you that means that while you're talking about pure regulatory, making sure that you follow, in this case, the FDA regulations, you still need to make sure that you position your device in the market properly, so that you don't get to the situation where you get an approval potentially very rapidly. You say, oh, it's the same as this device, but that device is basically sold for, you know, a tenth or a hundredth of the cost of your own device. Because all of a sudden, if you're trying then to sell them, after you've got FDA approval, you can just show, make a big splash online saying, we are happy to say that we have FDA approval for selling that product in the US. Great. And now you're dealing with a hospital, and the hospital say, okay, this is going to cost us something. Okay, with this device, we can maybe use this additional CPT code. What's the additional amount we can get? Oh, we can only get $10 more. That means we'll need to scan, in this case, if we're talking about radiology, we'll need to scan 3,000 patients until we just reimburse the device and stuff. It's like, at this stage, it becomes an accounting aspect for the hospital to buy your product. No matter how good your product and how great it can actually improve whatever it is, if you've managed to corner yourself into a position where the CPT code you can use and the positioning you can use will limit the amount of money that the hospital can pay for it, then you have the approval. You can do anything you want, but you cannot sell your product in the US because you cannot make the money that you need to. So at an early stage, it looks like a and I'm having ongoing discussion with specialists and that to see how you need to position your device on the market. It's just as important as going through all of the regulatory aspects.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Xavier. So, like, I think from what I'm understanding there, lots of medtech companies could be at risk of, I think, seeing regulatory as, okay, let's just quickly get past this as easy as possible, but then not realizing what that means for them. So, to really incorporate the regulatory into your actual commercial strategy as well, right? That's the way.
Exactly, and doing it early. I mean, I know a lot of. I mean, I'm a scientist by training, right? So again, I like the solutions. I like developing stuff, and that's what we're all about. But if you don't think about the regulatory aspect from the beginning, and again, they need to be pretty far out because it's you need to think about the safety and everything and all of this straight from the beginning. And from the MDR on the European side, you need to actually have you need to incorporate feedback from the patient and from the doctor and who is going to use it almost from the design onwards. And you need to actually record that as part of the MDR application, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. So on one side, you need to have that aspect of, oh, I have an idea to improve the life of patient, but you need to get that on at this stage. But at the same stage, you need to learn about how you're going to sell it. And in a different market, it's going to be different, as I said before. And again, even all the way down to the regulatory, that the market position is going to be important, you know, in a way. So that's what makes this whole field so interesting on one side and so difficult is everything is interconnected. You cannot actually separate the problems so much. They are going to have knock-on effects on each other. The 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 solution that you're creating is for a problem that is clinically relevant. If it's clinically relevant, you need to have input from the patient, at least for European side. But then also you need to understand how you're going to sell it in Europe. And again, I've just talked about UK and US, but every country in Europe will have a different system in terms when it comes to selling your product into it. So while it's CE marked, you can sell it everywhere. You don't sell the product the same way in Germany, in Spain, in France, in Italy. In our case of just talking about radiology, it's a very interesting thing for MRI in particular. There's only 2 countries in Europe that have a mandatory number of clinical scientists, so these physicists who are working in hospitals, who are specialized in MRI by law per number of MRI scanner. And this is Italy and Austria. But you need to know that. You need to know because that is going to change completely the way you're approaching those markets with respect to any other of the EU market where the medical physicists might be important as part of your pitch to sell because they're going to act generally as the your internal champion, but they generally won't have the decision power. And again, the general regulations inside the country will be an important aspect to take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense, and it really shows how intricate the whole situation is, even just between countries, right? Like you can't just look at the fact that you've got an approval and then just think that you can just go for the broad strategy across every single country or market, right? There's intricacies to understand.
One of the things that we have been using and we continue to develop is basically also working with distributors because direct sales into countries, and especially post-Brexit, can be a nightmare in terms of exporting and all the aspects related to that. But working with people who are specialists in selling into a country could be actually an advantage because they would know how to deal with that. And then you only have one partner in a country you're selling to, and they take care uh, of the rest. So that could be an interesting way of bypassing some of this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. That because, like you mentioned, it's so intricate and there's so much to do. Sometimes, like it might be difficult when you have, I guess, a business that you want to hold on to, but actually involving people who are experts along that journey can just make the journey a bit easier for you, right? Rather than feeling like,
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Uh,
look,
on all aspects, from regulatory, like your good self, to sales, to and again, even on the strategy side, uh, entering into the American market with a medical device is a minefield. And so it really, and I'm saying that, well, I am speaking to some of the leadership in radiology in the US who are really keen on trying our new products because they believe it's going to make a massive difference from a clinical perspective. Even under those conditions, we really need to walk on eggs and not rush it to make sure that we get things absolutely ironclad to avoid the kind of issues that we evoked before.
absolutely. Look, I'm conscious of taking a lot of your time and you've shared some really interesting insights. Is there any last bits of advice that you'd have for MedTech entrepreneurs still on the journey that you'd
I
say?
mean, embrace the fun. I think that's the thing. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of white hair additional for me, uh, but on the other hand, you need to also find some fun into it. Look at all these issues as problems to solve, just like the original problem that you solved with whatever kind of device or tool or AI software you've developed that you think is going to improve healthcare. I mean, healthcare is in dire need to improving, in particular, if you can, you know, lower the cost per patient and etc. It's going to be needed. So there's a lot of things needed, but it's also very hard. The only thing is a lot of technical people, scientists alike, don't like to handle all of these other issues. But if you turn this upside down, you can just think, this is just another very complicated issue I need to solve. And let's, use the same skills that you've got to come up with a technical solution to a problem to solve these issues.
Yeah. I guess that's probably one of the hard bits, like, isn't it? But you kind of alluded to it earlier that lots of skills that you even had from academia are transferable, but it kind of feels that you'll have to become a bit of a generalist, right? There's going to be
Oh, absolutely.
that come up.
I mean, if you can hire people to solve all of these issues for you, then you can continue to be just that. But that's not generally the case because you're short on cash, so you end up doing a lot of it yourself, right? So I'm still doing most of the sales and marketing myself in our company, even though we are like maybe just upwards of 10 FTEs with 9 people on the payroll, but you know, it's we don't have many people on the sales aspect. That's as another issue, and probably for another another time. But how do you move away from selling through the founders? And how do you scale that is really an interesting aspect as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, look, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff, I guess, because there is so much to it. But
Yeah.
look, I really, really appreciate your insight, Xavier. I'm sure the audience will get a lot of value from it, and I appreciate you kind of being very like candid and open with how things have been for you. So I really appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
You
Bye.
too.